I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
Well, if you are broke, like me, ain't got yourself a money tree, sometimes you take on projects that defies all normal logic.
Before you remove the lower end, ask yourself,
do you have what it takes, friend?
If the skills you lack, give yourself a great big smack. Climb the nearest tree.
fall to the ground while yelling.
Oh dear me. I hope you're still with me after that nonsense. The whole point of this video is going to be to see if I can help you save yourself a whole lot of time and a whole lot of trouble if you have to remove the lower unit off your boat motor and then put it back on. Honestly, removing it is easy. Putting it back on, now that can be another thing, and that's where I hope to help. So stay with me and let's see how I did it. This is a 2019 Mercury ProXS 115 horsepower. This one specifically has command thrust. And so you should be able to apply these steps to who knows how many different Mercury motors, probably any of the Mercury ProXS. In my case, there are 5 total nuts or bolts that we're going to have to remove to get this off the boat. So if you can see, I'm going to show you how I have the motor set up. You can kind of see the angle that it's at. Also, if you're just joining us, you probably are like, dude, you broke your skeg. Yes, I know I broke the skeg.
Slacker.
That's part of what this video is about. I'm showing you how to remove this so that you can do the 300-hour service, but I'm also showing you how you can remove it in case you need to get it repaired or replace it for that matter. And so first things first, there's a little rubber seal right here, if you can see that. And you should be able to just pop this out of this. There, it came out actually fairly easy, and I don't want to lose this. I'm going to set it in the boat. And now there's a hole. This is a plastic cowling that wraps around the actual, the real meat of the lower unit. I'm going to leave that on for what I'm doing. Okay, now we've got this off, and we're going to go down inside here, and there is a long bolt that we're going to take out. This is a 1/2 inch deep well socket. And I put an extension on it because it goes way down inside here below the surface of the cowling right here. So I've got that on there. So I'm just going to loosen this all the way up. Okay, I'm down at the very bottom of this now. I know it's actually shifting around and the anode's trying to kind of fall off in my hand. So at this point, if it's easy enough, I'll spin it. Nope. So what I've done is I've got my ratchet, and now I'm holding this underneath because I don't want it to just fall and hit the ground if I can prevent that. And at this point I can just turn it with my hand and it fell off. Okay, now that that's off, I'm just going to leave that bolt up in here. Okay, we have the anode off. That bolt is just laying in there. I'm not going to take it out. And there's another bolt that you need to remove from underneath here. That's the entire purpose of taking the anode off to start with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 9/16 socket, a deep well again, and I'm going to put that up in there. I'm going to see if I can break this loose without too much trouble. Yeah. That's out. Okay, so the first thing that you're probably wanting to know is, what is this great debate that you're talking about? Does it apply to me, and why do I care? If you start looking online for directions about how to remove the lower unit from most boat motors, a lot of people want to know, what position does the gear shifter need to be in? Now, by gear shifter, I'm talking about this thing you see on the screen. It's actually called a remote shift throttle control. Now, to understand why people want to know this,
Let's use this simple illustration. On the left side of your screen, I have an aluminum bar and it's solid. And on the right side of the screen, I have an aluminum bar and it's hollow. They're both in the same shape, but the one on the right that's hollow is larger so that the one on the left can fit inside of it. What's more, the bar on the left can be rotated 5 different ways and inserted into the hollow bar. Now let's say that I ask you to insert the solid bar on the left into the hollow bar on the right, and I tell you I want it inserted the way that it came out. After you think about this for a few seconds, you let me know I could only do that if I had seen it before you took it apart and made some markings on it like this. So those markings would allow you to put this back together exactly how it started. The trick is you would had to have made those markings before you took it apart. So this is what everybody's trying to do, is give themselves a known starting point. And while that may be easy with the remote throttle shift control, there's something else that's involved here. And that something else is called a shift shaft. And the shift shaft has to be in the same position that the remote throttle shift control is. Now, when you look at the remote throttle shift control, you kind of know where it is. It's either in the forward gear, in the neutral position, or it's in reverse. But when you look at the shift shaft in this image, can you tell what direction it's in? And then on top of that, even if everything was synced up like you wanted it to be and you remove the lower unit, how are you going to know that that shift shaft is exactly where it was since there's no indicator on it? Oh, no problem, I thought to myself. I'll just take some white fingernail polish and I'll mark the shift shaft and I'll mark the housing around it so I know exactly what reverse was, right? I mean, after all, that's how I started. Little did I know it had already moved, but we'll talk more about that soon. And just like everything else on the internet, you're going to find people who say it has to be in forward. Others say you have to put it in neutral. Others say you have to put it in reverse. I will tell you that I tried using reverse when I did mine, and that just did not work. And so what I think is more valuable is to explain to you the process that I went through and what I discovered to help me get it back on when everything else seemed to be failing. And so before this section of the video is finished, you'll be able to discern the difference between these two parts of the motor. You'll know what this little bitty thingy here is with the teeth on it, as well as what this shaft is that's nice and shiny and super long. You'll be able to identify whose cell phone this is, as well as why it has a skeleton dancing on it. Okay, so to get the conversation started, it is important to talk about these by their actual names, which honestly I'm terrible at. But at the top of your motor you have a top cowl, below that you have a lower cowl. Then to the right side you have something called a drive shaft housing, and that is inside the lower cowling. And then below that you have what I call the lower unit, but it's actually called a gear case. Now, if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, you may have the 25-inch version of the shaft, and the spacer that goes between there is simply called the drive shaft housing spacer. And I think probably everything in this video still applies to you too. And I don't want to leave out you fellows who have tiller handles on your motors. In fact, I looked up and both the ProXS 115 and 150 come with the option of a tiller handle. The biggest difference is where you change your gears from and where you control the throttle from. And now with that out of the way, let's talk about what these different parts are in the lower unit or the gear case. So I'm going to start off talking just briefly about the impeller. And the reason for that is I'm going to mention that again a little bit later in the video. And so I just want you to know what I'm talking about in case you don't know anything about these. So we'll start off with the impeller that you see on top of the screen here. Kind of looks like a freaky starfish. And I'm not going to go into detail about how to replace the impeller. That's the subject for another video, and I will produce that as soon as I can. For now, I just want you to know that the impeller is this black starfish looking thing. It sits inside the water pump housing, and then it is going to sit on top of the drive shaft, and it has a keyway at the bottom of the drive shaft and inside the impeller. And that is why if your engine is running, that drive shaft is turning. And if that drive shaft is turning, the impeller is turning at the same RPM. Now, moving on to what is probably the most important thing that you'll get out of this video, and that's going to be the shift shaft. Now, I'm very tempted to call it a gear shifter because in a way that's what it is. This is actually what controls whether you're in reverse, neutral, or forward gear. And so for the next few minutes, we'll talk about what determines whether you're in neutral, forward, or reverse. So the first thing I want you to do is imagine that we're taking this image and switching it to where you're looking down from the top of the drive shaft. And I'm going to introduce this image that I drew using a program on the computer that represents the actual image of the gear case from the top, looking straight down. And hopefully it makes sense that the blue at the top represents the shift shaft and the orange is the drive shaft. Now we're going to blow this image up a little bit, and I've left a legend on there so you can see what the different colors represent. And I'm going to add a gear shift knob. I know it's super fancy, but it's that red stick there, and I want you to pretend it is welded to the shift shaft, so that if I move it to the up position like this, the shift shaft had to rotate counterclockwise to accommodate that. Then I'm going to put the shift lever back into the initial position, and this time I'm going to push it down, and the shift shaft would have to have rotated clockwise in order to accommodate this movement. So we're going to put the lever back in the middle, and in case you haven't figured this out yet, this is going to represent neutral. In other words, with the motor running and the shift shaft in the position you see it here, with our shift lever where it's at, the propeller would not be moving. Now let's push the lever forward, which rotates the shift shaft counterclockwise, and this is going to be forward. Now this is the perfect time in this video to tell you this applies to my specific motor, which is a Mercury ProXS 115 horsepower, and it is the model year 2019. So what's important to know about that is other manufacturers of boat motors and other model years, other motor sizes, as far as horsepower goes, can vary all of this information. But there is some really good news, and that is the way that I'm going to tell you to put this back together doesn't really matter as long as you can find neutral. And then finally, just because I took the time to draw the image, if you haven't guessed by now, if you move the shift lever down, you're rotating the shift shaft clockwise once again, which puts the motor into reverse. And we'll visit some of this again in a few minutes, but for now, let's get back to the video.
The closest thing that I have is a 3/4 inch wrench. 3/4 inch wrench. That should be a song if nobody's made one.
3/4 inch wrench.
3/4 inch wrench.
So the first thing that we're going to do is,
So I don't know how many times I've already said this is the first thing that we're going to do. This is at least like the third time.
we're going to look and see a trick that you can use if you don't have a hammer or a mallet. There are a lot of different ways that you can put a lot of pressure on a wrench. You can use a mallet. You could certainly do that. You can also put a lot of pressure on these by doing this little trick. You can take a wrench and another wrench, and you can take the side like this and actually put a lot of pressure on this. So what does this look like? It goes like this. Okay, and then once you've got that on there, you're going to go like this. Okay, that's going to allow me to put a lot of pressure on this. Okay, I am not going to take that all the way off. Okay, here it is. That's the one. If you look right here, you can see the washer's loose. I'm not going to lower this much more than this for right now. What I do want to do is go ahead and try to get the other three loose. I've got plenty of the bolt that is built inside of this still retaining in this nylon threaded nut. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Stop at this point. So the next step for me is to get this lower unit off. We want to talk about how to do this safely. In my case, what I'm trying to do is make sure that I have the same amount of gap here and here and on the other side, so that when it comes loose, it's not going to come off, unevenly. I'd like for this to go very smoothly if I can. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing some gentle tapping on this lower unit, and I'm going to use a rubber mallet. I don't want to hit this thing very hard at all. Okay, I can see that starting to come loose now. So we are ready to go ahead and tilt the motor all the way up and remove the lower unit. All right, I've got 3 of those completely off. So now as I start to loosen this, you're going to notice me using my hand to hold the lower unit. Okay, that is off. Now I'm going to get up off the ground. And I'm just going to kind of wiggle it a little at a time to see if it will come out on its own. Just bring it straight out.
Okay, so I hope you're still with me at this point, and I really do appreciate you continuing to watch. If you did not hear the noise about 10 seconds ago in the video, go back and watch that. That's going to be more important than you realize. So if you recall, I tried using the reverse gear because that is what I found online in several different places. And after doing much research, I finally figured out what that noise was that I heard. And so to explain what I'm talking about, I'm going to very quickly cover how the internal gears work as far as the pinion gear, forward gear, reverse gear, and the propeller shaft. And in order to explain, we're going to focus on what is within the gear case where I have it outlined there with that black line. So first off, there is your propeller shaft that runs roughly right in the center of that. Now it's important to note that the images that I'm going to show you are just to use as a reference. They're not necessarily the correct part, and there are additional parts besides the ones I'm going to show you. I'm just not going to go into that level of detail. So starting off on the front of the propeller shaft, there's a bearing. But after the bearing is the front gear, front drive gear. After the front drive gear comes something called a clutch or a clutch dog. And behind the clutch dog comes the rear gear. And above all of that is the pinion gear. The pinion gear rotates clockwise with the drive shaft from the motor. Now the front gear, the clutch dog, and the rear drive gear are all mounted on the propeller shaft. Now, it's good to know that if your engine is running, your drive shaft is turning. If your drive shaft is turning, the pinion gear is turning. The pinion gear makes contact with both the front drive gear and the reverse drive gear. Now, this is important because it means that both the forward gear and the rear gear are always spinning. So if both of them are always moving, the question is, how does the propeller shaft not move? Now, if you take a look at the clutch dog, you'll notice that it has splines in the inside. But if you switch over and look at both the forward and the reverse gear in this image, those have smooth insides. They're not splined, and this is important. It's important because the forward drive gear and the reverse drive gear are always spinning. The forward gear spins clockwise and the reverse gear spins counterclockwise, or at least that is the case with my engine and my setup. So now we're going to add the propeller shaft back into the mix, and I'm going to shorten it right here to just the front part of it because that is pretty much where all of this is taking place. The forward gear, reverse gear, and the clutch dog all sit in this general area. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail about how the mechanical operation works. There are some really good videos online that can explain that probably better than I can. What I will say is it is the clutch dog that's going to move forward and backwards, and that is what's going to determine whether we're in forward, neutral, or reverse. So what happens when you move your remote shift throttle control forward, it's going to engage the front gear. As soon as it engages the front gear, it's going to start turning in the same direction. And when it does that, because it is splined with the propeller shaft is going to spin clockwise as well. Now the same can be said about the reverse gear. When you pull the remote throttle shift controller into the reverse position, it pushes the clutch dog backwards into the reverse gear. Now if you'll recall, the reverse gear is spinning counterclockwise, which means when the clutch hits it, it is also going to start spinning counterclockwise, which again engages the propeller shaft, and now the propeller is moving in a backwards direction or counterclockwise. When the clutch dog is in between the forward and reverse gear, if you haven't guessed by now, that's neutral. All right, so with all that out of the way, you are ready for
The test.
Now don't panic, put those phones down, no cheating, get ready. You have exactly 1 second to answer. All right, for 100 points, what is the most likely reason for this noise? A, Paul's last marble done fell out his head. B, Paul's wife dropped the potato salad. C, the clutch dog was in reverse but slid to neutral. Or D, Paul's last testicle finally dropped. Time's up. If you guessed anything other than C, well, you're wrong. Go ahead and give yourself a great big round of applause. Hug yourself. Tell your wife, please don't drop the potato salad. And let's move on to the next part of this video. I think the main takeaway is that as soon as I got the gear case far enough away from the lower cowling, the shift shaft was no longer being held by tension. And that allowed the clutch dog to slide freely from the reverse position back into neutral, and I think it even contacted the front gear, and that's the clunking sound that you're hearing. Okay, for now we're going to go ahead and go back to the video, but I still have a lot of tips that I'm going to give you, as well as an alternate way to put this thing back together that I think will really help you if you get in a bind like I did.
All right, so the tools that I have for this is going to be a 3/4 inch wrench, and that fits these nuts perfectly. And these are the 4 nuts and the 4 washers that came off the boat when we took the lower unit off. All right, so I'm going to use this Mercury Marine Grease 24C. This is pretty heavy duty grease. So I think we're good to go. And what I'm going to do is slowly, okay.
All right, I'm going to pause the video here because this is when everything started going very wrong for me. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that it probably took me around 3 hours, possibly 4 hours to get the lower unit reinstalled. Now you have to keep in mind, at this point, I think using the reverse gear is still a great idea, and as far as I know, everything's going really well, but it actually was not. So we've already talked about why reverse is probably not a good gear to go with, or at least in my case, it wasn't a good gear to start with. And we could go ahead and say, put it in forward. Forward is the best gear. But I'm actually going to tell you what I ended up doing after all was said and done that actually worked the best for me overall. You may recall that I said as long as you can find neutral, that I think I found a better way, and that is simply to have everything in neutral when you're trying to reinstall the lower unit. So you may recall this image from earlier, and how we were using the gear shift knob in red there to switch the shift shaft from forward to neutral, neutral to reverse, reverse back to neutral. Now, when you're reinstalling the lower unit back into the lower cowling, what you may not know is the order that things start to make contact with each other. One of the main tips that I can give you is that the drive shaft makes contact first, and then the shift shaft. Now the reason this is important is because I spent a considerable amount of time convinced that the shift shaft was not lined up correctly, and that is why I could not get the lower unit to reinstall correctly, only to find out later that it was actually the drive shaft was not lined up correctly with the splines, and all I had to do was put the propeller on, make sure that the lower unit was in gear, and spin it forward just a little bit, and then the spline lined up perfect and I was able to get the drive shaft started. So let's get back to the video and you'll see what I'm talking about, and then we'll cover some additional tips.
It goes that side first, somewhere up through there, I think.
If you hear this sound, don't panic. That's the entire reason I explained to you what the impeller was. That is the impeller turning in its housing.
There it is. I think I'll do this.
Okay, we're going to stop the video right here for a second. What I want you to pay attention to is the red flashing arrow, because I'm about to remove the only nut holding the lower unit on, and I want you to see how short of a distance it falls to the ground. And it happens fast, so don't blink. 3, 2, 1, boom. Okay, so now that the lower unit is resting on the ground, we have access to the shift shaft at the front of the gear case, and I'm going to reach in with my fingers and turn it, but I would recommend you consider using pliers. Just handle it very gently. It should not take much pressure to turn it in either direction, and all I've got to do now is find neutral. So you can see there, if you'll watch, you'll notice that all of a sudden starts spinning freely, and as soon as it spins freely, I know that I have it in neutral, and so now all that's left is to reinstall it. The drive shaft should already be engaged, just like it is. And don't forget to double check the remote throttle shift control, because it should be in neutral.
And I'm just going to put this up in here. You have to do that now because you won't be able to do it once the anode is on. Okay. Okay, so it's time to put this anode on the bottom of the foot. I don't see any sense in tightening that down extremely tight, so I put it just tight enough. Alright, so that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed the process of watching me kind of go through the repair.
I guess it's about this point that somehow I messed up the outro there. Let me just take the time to say thank you very much for watching the video. I hope it can help someone, and let me know what you think. Give me some questions down below or some comments. As always, tight lines, and God bless. So I'm going to try to do this and make the most comprehensive video on a 300-hour service charge. Service charge. Hey, welcome back to Paul's. Ooh.
Now I just noticed I have all kinds of glasses. I have reading glasses, I have sunglasses. Before it's over with, I'll probably have welding glasses. So here we go.